Happy Monday, and welcome back to the Lorden Arts channel. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today. Case Cracked is the show where we look into a mystery, and what are the critical pieces that help solve that mystery. Today's episode is called A Ride with a Friend. Ben and Edie Grunwald were overjoyed when they found out that Edie was pregnant at 37 years old. The military couple had wanted a child together for some time. David was born at the 1st of January in 2000 in Anchorage, Alaska. As he grew, his parents encouraged his curiosity and, later in life, he showed interest and talent in the fields of engineering and aviation. He attended aviation and space camp each summer. Everyone knew him as the clean-cut kid with a bright future. At 16 years old, he was a student at Matsu Career and Technical High School, which offers advanced placement coursework and exams to help high school students determine their career path. On November 13th, 2016, he left his house in Palmer to take his girlfriend Victoria back to her home in Butte. He vaguely mentioned that he might also give a friend, a boy named Eric Almendinger, a ride to Anchorage, which was about an hour away. The night wore on, but David didn't come home. When his father hadn't heard from him by midnight, a call was made to state troopers to report him missing. Ben told officers that his son, who was driving a Ford Bronco, was already 3 hours past the time he was to be home. He insisted that this behavior was totally unlike him. As investigators began to try to track down David's Bronco, they also questioned his girlfriend. She said that David had dropped her off without incident and had mentioned to her that he might take Almendinger to Anchorage. She hadn't seen or heard from him since. When Eric Almendinger's house was called, his father, Rodney, reported the same thing but didn't know if the two had made the trip, even though Eric was gone that night. Investigators were unable to track Eric down for questioning as well. On the 14th, David's Bronco was found by someone passing through an area west of Wasilla. It was completely torched. There were no signs of David at the scene, but one investigator found a single 9mm shell casing. Almendinger was finally located at his home on the 16th. When asked about David, he claimed not to have seen him that night, saying that he had instead taken a Premier taxi cab to Anchorage. When the cab company was called, they reported that no teens had been picked up and taken into Anchorage that day. This prompted investigators to obtain a search warrant in order to look at mobile data from a Samsung tablet that the 16-year-old used. The ping data indicated that the tablet had been near the spot where David's Bronco was burned, and it was there during the time period police estimate the crime happened. About a week later, an investigator looking through surveillance footage from a gas station near the burn site saw a cab enter and leave the area during the time frame that David went missing. The driver stated that he picked up 3 juveniles that night who were, quote, not dressed for the weather. They asked to be taken to Almendinger's address in Palmer, but only had enough to get them near the town's borders. Another search warrant was obtained for Almendinger's home. This time, investigators found a camper trailer on the property that smelled heavily of bleach. When the inside was searched, blood was found on the walls, floors, and toilet. Testing would show that that blood belonged to David. Investigators needed to find out who the 3 juvenile males were. An acquaintance of Almendinger's pointed an investigator in that direction by stating that on the 13th, Almendinger and a boy named Dominic Johnson showed up at his home and said they had killed David and needed advice. The boy sent them away and had nothing else to do with them. When Dominic Johnson was questioned, he refused to tell them anything about that night, but he did agree to take them to David. On December 2nd, Johnson led investigators to a spot 200 feet in the woods just off of Nick River Road, where David's body lay, covered in snow, dead from a single gunshot wound to the head. The investigation would reveal that 5 teens were involved in David's death. One of the youths, 16-year-old Bradley Renfro, recounted the night for investigators. After David took Victoria home, he did stop at Almendinger's house to smoke marijuana and drink some alcohol. The two went to a camper trailer on the property along with 19-year-old Austin Barrett, 16-year-old Dominic Johnson, and Renfro. The night had started out fine, with the boys playing on social media as they joked, drank, and smoked. Later in the evening, Almendinger said he noticed that David, quote, had smoked all his weed. This threw the young man into a rage. David was then locked in the trailer's bathroom while guns were retrieved from the house. When he was let out, the light had been turned off so that he wouldn't be able to see what happened next. The boys then beat David to near unconsciousness. It was found that these rural Alaskan teens had a fascination with the extremely violent Crips gang, an LA-based street gang. They decided to make an example of David that night. After the beating, he was loaded into his own Bronco and driven to a spot along Nick River Road, all the while pleading for his life and begging to be taken to Victoria's house. His pleas were ignored. He was then walked into the woods, where he was shot. With the help of another friend, 18-year-old Devin Peterson, the guns were hidden and gas was provided to burn the Bronco. David's cell phone was broken and tossed out near the spot where he was found. The camper was doused in bleach, and any carpet that had spots of blood was burned. All of the teens were arrested and held without bond under a litany of charges. No one could agree on who pulled the trigger that ended David's life. At first, all of the suspects were brought into court together, but as things progressed, it became apparent that they had to be split up, with separate trials being held for each one. The process was ugly, with David's parents having to hear over and over how their son died, while his so-called friends made jokes in court and acted like they were completely unconcerned with the proceedings. All of the boys would be tried as adults, and each had maintained their innocence. The first trial held was for Eric Almendinger. He was sentenced to serve 99 years total for first-degree murder, assault, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. He was also ordered to pay $5,000 in fines for arson and vehicle theft. Bradley Renfro was sentenced to 105 years for murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. He too will have to pay $5,000 in fines for arson and vehicle theft. Austin Barrett was sentenced to 45 years in prison for kidnapping and murder. Dominic Johnson will serve 99 years for murder. Devin Peterson was found to have taken no part in the beating and kidnapping, but was charged with tampering with evidence and hindering an investigation. Due to a plea deal, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison, which will be served concurrently with another 3 years of federal charges for giving drugs to minors. When the Grunwald family gave their victim impact statements, they all talked of the horror of their loss and spoke out against the young men, not just for the current situation, but for the future as well. Quote, "These particular murderers should not have a second chance," Mother Edie Grunwald said. "They need to bear the consequences of their actions. What they did was heinous. What many people do not understand is that this thing is forever. There's no do-overs." David's father, Ben, expressed his desire that everyone understand the severity of this crime. His son's murder wasn't the result of fun that went wrong, and he had a profound view of something that so many families in this situation crave. "What is justice?" he asked the court. "Do I take a cup of justice out to my son's grave? Will he have justice then? Or is justice just an idea?" Case cracked. I would like to thank AlaskanNewsSource.com, CBSNews.com, USANews.com, People.com, ADN.com, Britannica.com, Law.alaska.gov, and Frontiersman.com. Of course, the biggest thank you goes to Christy Arnhart for researching and writing up today's case, and here she is now to discuss it with us. I don't know about you, Christy, but those words from his father about justice, like it's so important to understand that, like what these families go through. And there's never a point where everything is kind of leveled out and it's like, oh, okay, you've got, what you deserve now. They don't, because they're missing their son. And this story just, I feel like, I'm sure most of us have had friends in our past that we thought maybe didn't bring out the best in us. And I can think of a few where I'm like, that person flat out brought out the worst in me.
Oh yeah, me too.
But this type of story, this is just taking it to a whole other level.
It is. It's got to be the worst case of hive mentality I've ever seen. And just to let you know, WebMD describes it as when a person has a strong tendency to fall for a group decision making. If someone has a hive mentality, they may feel invulnerable and morally correct when they're part of a certain group.
Yeah, and that's obviously going on in this story. And I think, they kind of have this like affinity for gang culture that's wrapped up in
Mhm.
it. And they think like that's a way to be, like that's a way for them to exist. And a feeling of being invulnerable, like certainly has to be a part of that when you're considering doing something like this.
Oh,
Um,
definitely. And it seems that it was because prosecutors presented evidence at trial that showed that the four boys partied after the murder.
ah, I mean, it was terrible just hearing the perspective of how they were acting in the courtrooms.
Hmm.
But to know that, it's even worse. It's
Yeah.
just it's really sad. Like, I've been in situations like that, and I feel pretty lucky that it feels like it was always me to be the one to be like, okay, this isn't for me anymore. Like I'm getting out of this, and it's happened a few times in my life. It's really sad to me that there wasn't one person in this group of 4 to 5 that could just say, okay, this isn't a great situation. I need to get out of this. Ultimately, we have 5 people that completely lost their futures.
Oh, yes. I
And then
mean,
we have another guy that's in there for 6 years, but we've got 5 people, their futures, they're never going to have it again. Obviously, with
mm-mm,
David being the worst victim of that.
mm-hmm. It's terrible. I mean, the medical examiner stated that if just one person had stepped in and stopped him from being shot, he would have fully recovered from his wounds.
Wow. Wow. It's terrible.
It is.
And from what I understand, it looks like David's case actually helps prompt justice in another case. How does that happen?
It does. Actually, 6 months before David was killed, a 16-year-old runaway named Frank Woodward was shot. Now, Woodward was killed by Devin Peterson's brother, Damien.
Oh,
Devin was there with him.
wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So Devin's involved in both these. Well, sometimes they say it's like one bad apple spoils the bunch. I think we're starting to identify that here. But his brother effectively is committing another crime.
Oh, yes. Yes. And Austin Barrett's there as well. So you've already got two of these kids. It's pitiful.
Wow.
Now, supposedly the boys were at a trap house where they were smoking marijuana, drinking, playing with guns, gaming, all the things that you do. Woodward came in and asked if he could see the gun. It was given to him, and moments later, he was shot.
Okay.
Now, when Damien talked to the police, he said that Woodward accidentally shot himself. But when paramedics arrived, Woodward was still alive, and he lived long enough to tell them that no, someone had shot him, but he died before he could say who it was.
Wow. Wow. So what happens? How does this case nudge that one?
Well, at first, like I said, they didn't have definitive proof that this boy had killed the other.
Right.
So they were looking at more, accidental shooting until they started questioning everybody in David's case.
Mm.
Then Woodward's case came back up. They started learning more new details and they were able to reopen that case.
Wow.
In the end, Damien was put in jail. He actually copped to manslaughter on a plea deal.
Okay. Okay.
And then you hear Devin has charges as well. And that's what came up in the script. That was the selling drugs to minors.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, at least we know they're not going to be hanging out with anyone else. What is it with these, what they're thinking a good time is? Like,
I don't know.
smoke a little weed, do a little drinking. I get it. But yeah, we're going to be flipping around playing with guns at the same time. Like, I don't know.
Trying to live this thug life. It's like,
I
come
guess.
on, guys.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of, like, I run into research I do all the time in Facebook in particular. And there is just a big propensity for people to represent that they're living that type of lifestyle. And I think, all right, yes, we do have certain movies, we've got video games, we've got music that's kind of representative of that as well. But I think now with this social media angle, it's just bringing it closer and closer and closer. And at some point, it's like, well, to not be fake about having that type of profile and fronting that type of life, I guess I got to start doing this kind of stuff. And actually, I don't know. It's just I think there's an aspect of that particular vibe, that particular thing, and how it used to be marketed and sold, but now it's come down to literally it's our friends that we're looking at on Facebook saying, oh wow, I want to be like him, I want to be like them. It's kind of like influencer complex, but gone to just a really dark place. And I don't know, it's really unfortunate, but I hope stories like this help other people learn about that stuff and turn it around. One of these people could have been a hero in this story. That's what's terrible about it. One person, this could have been a completely different outcome. A bunch of guys could have had a future where they figured out, oh, we're not living a great way. And David could still be alive to go on to an amazing career in aviation or space. And it's just,
I mean, and now they're there for life.
yeah.
I mean, the chances of their parole, it was so violent.
Yeah.
They'll have a hard time even doing that.
Oh, yeah. And especially if they want to, yeah, you're a big thug now. You're going to be a big thug for the rest of your life while you're living it out in jail.
True that.
Christy, thank you so much for your hard work on today's episode. We really appreciate you. And I've got some other people to thank right now. Thank you, PayPal supporters Sigrid E. O'Hearn and Lewis Holmes. For over 6 years, we've always run limited commercial ads here on YouTube, and we can't do that without support. If you'd like to help the channel, please visit lordandarts.com. There you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee, like Candy Bishop recently did. We know that learning about the mechanisms that help support and find justice in these cases is important to understand the many unsolved cases we also cover, and we really appreciate your support in allowing us to continue doing that. Remember, you can get another Lord and Art story every week on the Seriously Mysterious podcast. A new episode is coming tomorrow and every Tuesday after that. Visit seriouslymysterious.com and remember to subscribe on your favorite podcatchers. While you're here, please don't forget to subscribe below and hit that bell icon if you want to catch one of our weekly Secret Studio live shows. And please come back on Wednesday for a very special update on a case that we've covered several times in the past, the trial of Jonathan Cruz. We'll see you again here on the Lord and Arts channel.